Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 90 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. I'm also a member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee. I'm a district activist leader for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. I'm thrilled to be with you today. I see people are continuing to join our webcast, so let's give them just another few seconds, and then we'll get started. Thank you to all of you who are joining us on GoToWebinar, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to connect you with MS experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. So as I chat with our expert today, please feel free to post your questions on Facebook and YouTube or type them into the question box if you're joining us on GoToWebinar. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can during the Q&A portion of today's program. Today marks 19 years since our nation experienced the tragedy of the September 11th attacks. With such adversity and heartbreak, we witnessed that the human spirit is more resilient than we realize. We learned that the challenges and setbacks are opportunities for growth. We can use them to our advantage. It's not about the situation we find ourselves in, but what we make of that situation. Today, we're talking about resilience and MS with Dr. Dawn Ehde, a clinical psychologist and professor of rehabilitation medicine at UW-Medicine, where Dr. Ehde has an endowed professorship in multiple sclerosis research. Dr. Ehde and her group at UW have conducted several studies on resilience in MS. They've published their results in scientific journals and have been major contributors to developing educational programs on resilience for the National MS Society. Welcome, Dr. Ehde, and thank you for being with us today. People living with multiple sclerosis and their families may find that the physical, emotional, cognitive, psychological, and spiritual challenges of living with the disease can be overwhelming. However, we know that many people living with chronic diseases, including MS, have learned that practicing behaviors that promote resilience empowers them to not only cope with their disease, but thrive in spite of their disease. So I think maybe the best place to start our conversation today is asking you to explain exactly what resilience is.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to talk about resilience. So really, we learned a lot about resilience from the 9/11 tragedy and other tragedies that other people in our country and around the world have experienced. And the typical definition of resilience is that it's the capacity to adapt to or persist in the face of challenges or ongoing stressors or adversity. So, for example, the ability to bounce back from a trauma, such as a loss of someone you love, or a motor vehicle accident, or loss of a job, those kinds of things. We also know, however, that ongoing daily stressors and hassles are also can add up to creating a stressful situation that resilience can be useful in. I know my colleagues and I at the University of Washington were particularly interested about 5 years ago in understanding what resilience is to people who are affected by MS. So we decided to do a variety of studies where we really sat down and interviewed people with MS and their care partners and family members. We did focus groups, including of families, and really looked at kind of how they view resilience and what resilience is and looks like to them. And we learned a few things that I think add some nice, I guess, clarifications or nuances to this idea of resilience. You know, one of the things we learned from talking with people with MS is that it is really an important skill. It's something that's both a trait that people tend to have a set point, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But it's also something that people can learn. And many of the people we talked to talked about how they had learned to be more resilient in the face of their MS. It's also something that's present across a range of stressors, as I mentioned earlier, for people with MS too. So a sudden major event like a diagnosis or a loss of function, a setback, as well as just the daily hassles and stressors that come from living with a chronic disease. We also heard that it really can look different depending on the stressor and the situation for people with MS. And I want to just point out just one last other thing about what resilience is, again, from the words of people living with MS. In 2016, I had the opportunity to work with the society and several people with MS to do the North American educational program on resilience. And I really like how resilience was defined by several of the people with MS who were part of that effort. Danya Baines said, "Resilience is about bouncing back up and finding ways to adjust your life, pushing forward regardless of what's going on." Chuck Curry, also another person with MS, said it's about not only strength, but flexibility. And we'll come back to that idea later. And others said it's really making the most of what happens to you and finding ways to get through.
Dr. Ehde, where does resilience come from? Is resilience something that some people are born with, or are there skills that people can use to develop resilience?
You know, John, it's really both. Research indicates that humans have a set point, kind of a place or kind of a natural level or set point of resilience that's determined in part by our biology, by our individual genetics, and by those early life experiences. So some of that, you know, so we kind of have a certain level. However, we also know, and science supports this, that resilience is not just up to this kind of individual set point or something that you either have or don't have, but rather that it's really influenced by our environments and by other people and by what we do, the strategies that we use and learn to manage stressors.
You just mentioned our biology, and I'm curious about that. We've all heard about the fight or flight response, and I'm wondering whether it or other factors are associated with the biology of resilience.
Absolutely. So I think we've all probably heard of this idea of the fight or flight response, that kind of in our evolutionary history, that as humans, we were, you know, when we were faced with something that was life-threatening, such as, you know, a bear or you know, a woolly mammoth, whatever, that we would have a response of either fight, that is trying to fight to preserve our lives, or flight, to get away, to get out of there as fast as we could to preserve our life. And that was very adaptive. And that fight or flight response has stayed with us over the years, even though our likelihood of encountering a bear, for example, in the wilderness is quite low these days, or other kinds of life-threatening situations like that on a day-to-day basis. We know that there's really a variety of processes in our bodies, our biology, that react to equip us to deal with stressors. So one of them that many of you have probably heard is cortisol. That's considered the stress hormone. So when we're faced with something, again, like that proverbial bear in the woods, this whole cascade of events happens in our biology that prepares us to deal with a situation, including the release of this cortisol stress hormone. Now, in the short run, that's a good thing. It helps us to deal with the situation. And let's say it's a situation like, you know, something where you have to deal with something, you know, in your current life, you know, that can be very useful. However, what we find is that oftentimes we become conditioned to or have to respond to many things with this fight or flight response because of ongoing or chronic stressors. And that ongoing production of cortisol and the other responses in our bodies are not so helpful to our bodies over the long term. Short term, yes, long term, no. And we know that prolonged release of the stress hormone and other factors are what contribute to some of the anxiety, depression, heart disease, and a host of other problems that humans can have.
We've heard from Jen. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, just how this relates to resilience then is that, the degree to which we all respond to events and situations or challenges with this stress response varies. Some people are more prone to respond that way than others. And that is something you could learn to deal with to be more resilient.
We've heard from Janice, and Janice tells us that ever since she was diagnosed with MS, she's had a hard time thinking positively about her future. And Janice is worried that until she figures out how to get rid of her negative thoughts, she really can't get her life back in order. So, is resilience about trying to eliminate negative thoughts and feelings?
No, absolutely not. Resilience is not about being happy all the time or ignoring or denying the very real challenges of living with MS. Rather, it's really about recognizing the full range of emotions, the thoughts that can go along with that, everything from sadness to anger, anxiety, happiness, and really working with and through those emotions. It's also about adaptation and finding ways to move forward. And so I like to tell people that, resilience really is about having the courage and the hope to face those challenging situations and to manage them, and that it requires action.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that resilience is such an important aspect of living your best life with MS or any chronic illness. But I'm curious, Dr. Ehde, what does your research show about the role that resilience plays in someone's overall well-being?
Yeah. So a number of studies done specifically in people with MS, including studies done at one point in time or following people over time, has taught us that resilience is really a key factor in someone's well-being. So we've seen, for example, that resilience is something people can learn, and people with MS can learn and increase on. We did a study where we used a program from the society, the Everyday Matters program, which has a lot of resilience building skills in it. And we saw that people who were in that study as compared to people who weren't in, or that program versus people who weren't in that program, showed an increase in resilience and some of the other positive benefits that we see. Research has shown us also that resilience really increases a variety of things. So it increases people's mood. People tend to sleep better the more resilient they are. When people become more resilient, they have better ability to manage symptoms such as fatigue. They tend to be more active and just really more engaged in life and have healthier relationships. The really interesting thing is that resilience has less to do with how severe your MS is and much more to do with how you respond to your illness and how resilient you are. So that's the encouraging piece in this, is that there's many things that can be done. And that's the research continues to show us that, including in people with MS.
Well, Jessica has reached out and said she was diagnosed just a year ago. She's remained positive in front of her family, but her family, are constantly worrying about her. And a recent relapse was a big setback for them emotionally. Dr. Ehde, what about family? How important is it for the overall family to nurture their resilience skills?
Yeah, well, as you know, John, and others on this webinar, MS doesn't just affect one person, it affects the whole family. And everyone has to adapt. Anytime you love somebody who has a condition like MS, you're going to be affected. And so we know that resilience is not only beneficial then to the person who has the disease, but also their patient, their family, and even their network. And that if everyone works together for everyone's health, by being resilient and doing things to build resilience, it's gonna benefit not just the person with MS, but everyone else. One thing about what you mentioned about Jessica's question is that I do want to emphasize that not everyone responds to an illness or a stressor in the same way. And so I want to point out that that for some people, they stay positive, and that is just genuinely how they're feeling and how they're acting. And sometimes family or friends can wonder, like, is something wrong? Why are they not depressed? Why are they not grieving? And I think we need to be really mindful that people do respond in different ways, including family members. And we need families and friends need to respect that the person with MS, just as their family, all have different ways of responding most of the time, which are normal ways. And so that's just an important thing to think about when thinking about how families are affected too, is that people might be coping or responding in very different ways to a diagnosis or to a recent relapse. And just being aware and mindful of that and talking about that and making that okay, that people have different reactions.
You know, that's an interesting point you bring up. It reminded me of another side to this equation. We know so many MS symptoms are invisible. And if you're dealing with those invisible symptoms, which are very real, and managing to be resilient and maintain a positive outlook, people may underestimate the impact MS is having on your life. The people around you may think, gee, maybe it's not as bad as we thought it would be. And it's important, I guess, for communication to really clear the air about where you are and how you're feeling about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It can be both. It's kind of both sides, right? You might be doing well and people think you shouldn't be doing well because you have MS or had something. Conversely, you might not be doing so well. So many symptoms are hidden. And so, as you said, it's communication is really key in those circumstances and accepting people where they're at.
Well, thank you for sharing some very helpful insights into what resilience is and why it's such an important aspect of maintaining well-being for people affected by MS. Before we continue our discussion, I want to acknowledge viewers who joined us via GoToWebinar, Facebook, and YouTube Live. Welcome. Please let us know what's on your mind. Enter your comments and questions on Facebook and YouTube or in the question box if you join via GoToWebinar. We'll be getting to as many of your questions in just a bit, so please share that information with your family and friends. Let them know that our Ask an MS Expert webinar takes place every Friday at this time, and we'd love to see you and them back with us every single week. We're talking with Dr. Dawn Ehde about the positive impact resilience can have on addressing the everyday challenges of living with MS. And now I'm hoping we can spend a few minutes talking about how someone can build or increase their resilience. So if that's a good place for us to pick up our conversation, Dr. Ehde, how can someone go about building resilience?
Well, this is a really exciting part for me to talk about. In addition to the research and staying up with kind of the field of resilience in general, I've spent a lot of time talking with people who have MS and their families, and also, really learned a lot in that process. And so I think the encouraging thing is that there are a lot of ways to build resilience. And I think one of the key things to keep in mind, though, is best said by Chuck Curry, again, one of the people with MS who was part of the resilience program the society put on. Chuck said, resilience is like a muscle. You have to exercise it. So I see that as kind of the good news, bad news. The bad news is it's not something that you build it up and then you're good and you don't have to do anything. Resilience is something you really have to have an ongoing practice of. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do everything. Some of it's just going to be in resilience, just going to come about naturally. But it also is something you want to be mindful of, and we'll talk more about that as we talk about some of the key strategies. The other thing I'd say about building resilience is that it's good to think of it almost like a menu or a toolkit where there's a variety of ways that you already are likely showing resilience or building resilience, and that there's different strategies work for different people. There's no one pathway to being resilient or right or wrong way to being resilient. And the good news in that is that, all of us can learn ways or try things to help us even be more resilient during challenging times. So there's a lot of hope in that message, a lot to do.
Well, I heard you give us a hint about talking about key strategies, so this would be a great time to talk about them. What are the key strategies for people to be aware of when it comes to building resilience?
Yeah, so I think one of the first ones is just to take a self-assessment, just to kind of reflect, what are you already doing? I'm guessing that that every single person who's on this webinar is doing some things that help them to be resilient, and to give yourself credit where credit's due, and to notice those things. Some of the strategies I'm about to talk about, you've probably already doing. So I think being self-aware as best you can, really looking at kind of an inventory. What am I already doing? And there's a variety of resources that have ideas on how to take that inventory that we'll share with you later. Then there's really a wide range. I mean, one of the ways that I think people find really helpful is to be active, and that might be physically active, that might be socially active, or kind of intellectually active. So doing things that you enjoy, or that bring you some sense of satisfaction or connect you to others. All those are ways to be resilient. We know that people who are physically active tend to be more resilient. So, starting, doing what you can from home, if you're living from home, working from home like most of us, looking for ways to engage with other people, even if it has to be virtually during this time of the pandemic, but not letting those things fall aside. So that's kind of one category, is doing things. So often I think, and I see this a lot with people with MS, they think, oh, I don't, I'll take care of myself, or I'll do something when I have time after I get my to-do list done, or all these tasks, or I don't have the energy. I think it's really putting yourself and your resilience kind of front and center, doing a little bit every day, so that you can then, have the time to share and take care of others. Other strategies, really, we know that people who are have kind of good problem solving skills are more resilient. So looking at ways, just kind of thinking about, like, what is the situation? How can I solve it? And if you don't have ideas on that, checking with a trusted friend or family member. Doing things that are creative, even if you're not good at them, engaging in some kind of hobby or something that just brings you a little bit of self-satisfaction or some sense of meaning. We also know that people who are resilient benefit from really looking at how they think about things, and their perspective. And we'll talk about that again here, probably. I'm guessing that'll come up again in a moment. I think really maintaining strong social connections, as I mentioned. Also, looking for ways to have just a little positive affect, and by that, or positive emotion. And by that, I mean, taking a chance to watch some little video, or read something, or do something that brings you some just small joy or humor or satisfaction. And a lot of us were conditioned to kind of not engage in fun things, or things that make us laugh, or things that just bring us, simple joy, until we get our work done. But it's really important to make time in your day to just do something that's just purely for the fun of it or the joy of it, because we know that anything you do that can kind of trigger or build positive emotions, whether it be something as simple as, just being content or satisfied, or having some humor or joy, etc. Those kinds of positive emotions, they help us be resilient when times are tough. They help us kind of build up our resilience muscle. So it's really important to look for opportunities in your day, just simple ones that you can do to build up that resilience reserve. And also stress reduction strategies are really helpful.
We're going to circle back to stress in a moment, but we heard from Jeff, and Jeff wrote that he's been living with MS for over 13 years. And many times when he was struggling with fatigue or an MS relapse, his friends would remind him that these episodes would make him stronger to tackle the next ones. So were Jeff's friends right? Does overcoming adversity help to build your resilience?
Absolutely. I think every time we deal with something stressful or some adversity, even if it's something something like a relapse, or something even as simple as just getting frustrated at the grocery store, if you can go home or think about what you did and what went well for helping you get through that challenge, and what didn't go so well, and learn from that, all that is kind of a chance to practice your resilience, and it's going to increase your resilience. Again, especially if you look at what you learned and what you can do next time. I
We've
think
also heard,
one other point. Oh,
Mhm.
sorry, John. I was just going to mention, I don't think it also gives us a sense of self-confidence, right? If we can see that we can get through tough stuff, it's going to help us feel more confident to face that future stressor.
Makes sense. We've also heard from Veronica, and she's experiencing some new symptoms this past week. And Veronica's worried that she might be transitioning to a more progressive form of MS. Her husband is asking her not to jump to any conclusions and not to always perceive things so negatively. But Veronica's struggling with that. Dr. Ehde, is there a process for someone to work through that would help them shift their perspective to a more positive one?
Yeah, this one is a really great example, and something I hear a lot from people is there's some very real anxiety that comes from a change in symptoms or from living with MS, and Veronica could be right. It may be that her symptoms are a signal of something progressing with her disease, and I think the trick is finding out how to balance that with also the fact that it may not be. And so one of the things that can be really helpful, a really key tool, is this idea of shifting your perspective. There's a variety of things we call it, but it's essentially looking at how you think about something and your kind of your viewpoint or your mindset about something, and then trying to really look at it objectively and see if it's helping you to think that way, and then looking at maybe changing it. So let me talk you through an example of what I mean. So, and by the way, this is something that's often used in a type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, which was described in a recent Monitor article if you want to delve into that a bit more. But it's also something you can do on your own. So in this example, Veronica is experiencing some new symptoms, and maybe she's thinking to herself, because she's worried, understandably, I'm progressing I'm progressing, my disease is progressing. So one of the things she could do in this circumstance is to really look at the evidence, so this thought that's generating anxiety is this thought of I'm progressing. And to look at that, there might be some evidence that she could be, there might be some evidence that she hasn't. So for example, in the past, maybe her symptoms have flared up, as they often do for people with MS, and her disease didn't progress. So she knows from past experience, my guess is that sometimes these symptoms are not an indicator of disease progression. And so kind of noticing that, thinking through that, and then coming up with maybe some counterpoints or alternative ways of thinking about it, such as, it could be that this is just a bad day, or my symptoms are just worse this week. And there's something I can do about it. I can go to my doctor, I can contact them. If this persists, I can get help. And even if it is, I have ways to cope with it. So trying to come up with some thoughts that are going to help her doesn't mean the situation is any less real or valid. It's just helping her to be resilient by shifting her perspective. And what we know is often if people can shift their perspective to more helpful thinking or a more helpful perspective, then they're often kind of better equipped to deal with what's going on and can kind of take those steps they need to see their doctor, or to focus on something else to distract them from their symptoms, or whatever it might be.
I'm thinking about Jeff and his friends who we just talked about a moment ago. I'm wondering, when it comes to building your resilience, how important is maintaining strong social connections?
It is critical. I mean, one of the things I want people to take away from this today is that although we're talking a lot about what individuals can do, because that's what most people have the most power over, is what they do, maintaining social connections and the environment around people is just as important for many reasons. We know that people with strong social connections tend to be more resilient, and that they tend to get support, encouragement, experience positive emotions, joking around with their friends or having fun times with their friends. Those social connections really help people cope. We're not meant to live alone, and we're meant to be in with family or friends and have these connections. And this can be challenging because when people with MS, or anytime we're undergoing stress, we sometimes some people, especially introverts, have a tendency to kind of draw inward and to not maintain their social connections. And so we have to work harder at forcing ourselves to connect with friends or family, whether it's asking for help because you need help with something, or simply reaching out to say, hey, can we have a phone call? Can we do a video chat? I want to connect with you and see how you're doing. So we know that people who have strong social connections and who nurture those connections are going to be more resilient.
We started to talk about this just a moment ago, and I said I wanted to circle back. Are there some stress reduction strategies that can help people?
Yeah. The good news about resilience and stress reduction is that a lot of the strategies that are beneficial for stress are beneficial for other things that people with MS commonly cope with. Things like pain, things like fatigue, and certainly help build resilience. So I'm going to just list some of those. And many of these are covered in the various resources that we're providing to people as part of this program. So one of the key ones is stress reduction techniques is something called either relaxation training or mindfulness meditation. So relaxation training is not simply just relaxing in front of the TV, but rather it's the deliberate practice of engaging in an activity that kind of calms your nervous system, that calms that stress response. So oftentimes relaxation, when we use it in our research and in our clinics or just in our everyday life, we teach people to kind of focus on their breathing and to do some deep breathing exercises, often paired with some imagery or some soothing ideas and thinking. And that this kind of deep breathing, calming breaths can really help people relax. And again, it not just mentally relax, but it helps trigger the kind of the opposite response to the stress response, kind of the calming response. And we encourage people to do some form of relaxation on a daily basis. And there's a variety of resources. There's apps, there's recordings. You can do it without any kind of recording, just simply by focusing on deep breathing. A lot of ways you can learn this very basic but important skill. There's also something called mindfulness meditation. And in the practice that I encourage, mindfulness meditation is really just kind of keying in on the moment, the present moment, non-judgmentally, and being just kind of in your present awareness. And then meditation is really practicing that experience of trying to hone in on the present moment, to not be judgmental, and just to notice what's going on. And so a variety of mindfulness techniques as well that have been shown to help with stress management. They help people kind of see that break between reacting and responding, so that instead of just reacting to stress, they can kind of take a step back and go, okay, here's what I'm noticing. Here's how I'm feeling like responding, and having a more conscious choice about what they do. We also know that people can use some of these cognitive strategies or kind of perspective changing strategies I talked about, that are outlined, helping yourself to kind of actively look at how you're thinking about stressful situations and your ability to cope with them, and then trying to modify those in a way that's helpful, not to negate what's going on, but to think of ways that kind of coach you into approaching the situation and dealing with it. Again, taking breaks, socializing, a variety of other tools that you can use to manage stress. Again, also some kind of activity. It's harder to do with COVID, getting out and about, or at least doing something within wherever you're comfortable and safe can be helpful as well.
Well, while we're discussing stress, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused unprecedented challenges and hardships for so many people. Could we talk about resilience in the time of the pandemic?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring this up, John. I want to be really mindful of the fact that on top of MS, people today are coping with just so many challenges. And I think a first step is we just have to recognize that this is a tough time for many people, if not just about everybody, whether or not they have MS. But particularly when they have MS, there's added stressors, like people are losing jobs. You're not able to get out as much. You're not, you're perhaps have concerns about your health, or have even been exposed to COVID. I mean, there's so many things that are harder about this current time. And I think we have to acknowledge that. I think by acknowledging it, that tells us that we probably need to work a little harder. And I don't mean that that people aren't doing a good enough job, but we just need to give ourselves permission to really try to nurture, take stock of where you're at with your resilience and how you're managing the pandemic and everything that goes with it, and then giving yourself permission to have a variety of feelings, and that there's a lot of anxiety and loss that can go with what's going on, and to give yourself that's okay that you feel that, but then to try to shift and learn, what can you do to help you get through this tough time. And so, there's a variety of strategies, the ones I've mentioned before. I think also just really allowing yourself to simplify and expect less of yourself and others. Maybe your to-do list needs to have just one item on it every day. And I think also being more forgiving and self-compassionate towards yourself, realizing that this is a tough time and you're doing the best you can. There may be more things you can do or something else you can do to even help you better, but not berating yourself for that, and instead focusing on what you are doing to get through and what you're doing to with others to get through.
Well, since we've been discussing building resilience, can you tell us about some tools and resources that exist to help build resilience?
Absolutely. So, first of all, as I've mentioned, the Society has put together a number of resources, and you will have links to those. So there's their North American Educational Program, which has a series of, or has a video. It has a nice workbook that covers in much more depth than we can cover today. So I would encourage you to look at that. They have other resilience resources, including the Everyday Matters program, that has a series of videos where you can watch people with MS talking about resilience and see strategies and experts talking about ways to build resilience. And that also has a workbook. Also, there's something that we put together with the University of Michigan called the MS Toolkit, which is also something you can find by linking to my website or our website at the university, which you'll have that key. But the MS Toolkit, although it's not specific to resilient, it has a lot of these tools I talked about, like the relaxation and how to set goals to be physically active, especially when you have maybe physical limitations or just can't get out and go to the gym like you might have before. It has other tools, a mindfulness tool, and a variety of other things for you, including talking about communication and how to communicate around issues. I guess the other thing I'd say is that I think there was at least one article in the Momentum about CBT, as I mentioned, I think in the last issue, about cognitive behavioral therapy that has some ideas. And also Momentum had an article on resilience a few years back.
Are there professionals that can help someone build their resilience?
Absolutely. I mean, although it's something I believe everybody can work on their own and benefit from, I also think there are times, especially if you notice you're really struggling or you're feeling very anxious or distressed or depressed to the point it's getting in your way of kind of doing what you need to do on a daily basis, that would be a good time. And even if it isn't, it would be a good idea to think about talking to a therapist. And so certainly a psychologist or social worker or mental health counselor with expertise in MS and or chronic conditions can be really helpful. And I think I would specifically tell them that you want to learn skills and strategies. It's helpful to have someone to talk to, but to also see somebody who can give you tools for building your resilience and helping you see what you're already doing well.
We've covered a lot of really helpful and important information today. Dr. Ehde, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways that our audience should keep in mind?
Well, I think one is that there is really no one right way to be resilient. And I certainly hope away from this that they have to go home and do everything I've mentioned and everything in the resources. That will become overwhelming and you'll just feel, you won't do anything because it's too much. I think the good news is that because there's no right way, there's no single path to resilience, is that there's many different options that you can try and see what fits for you. A second, I think, takeaway is, I think, said best by Rachel Paget, who is a woman with MS who was part of the resilience program. She said it best when she said, resilience is a work in progress. So from that, all of us can nurture our resilience, but it does take work. We need to reflect on what we're doing and build from there. Try a strategy. If it helps us, great. Try to incorporate it into our daily life, or go back to maybe use ones you found that are helpful in the past. But again, thinking of it as a work in progress or a muscle you have to keep exercising is really helpful. And the other thing I'd say is resilience is something I encourage people to kind of take stock of and nurture, even when things are going well. Maybe you have a week or a time period where you're not feeling particularly stressed. You're kind of managing well. That's okay. Give yourself credit for that, but don't forget to keep doing the things that got you to where you are. So I like to think of it as a savings account. We need to keep saving, even if it's just a tiny bit at a time, so that then someday when we need to withdraw to cover some big expense or some, deal with some bigger stressor, you've got something built up to draw from. So, I think, ask yourself, what is one thing today I've done or I can do to nurture or tap into my resilience?
Well, thank you again, Dr. Ehde, for sharing your expertise on a really important aspect of MS self-care. Now, I'd like to address more of the questions that our viewers have for you. We have heard from Jamal, who says, my children are at home learning virtually, and I'm working from home. Each day is a new struggle. What advice do you have for being flexible and adapting to the ever-changing challenges brought about by COVID-19?
Yeah, boy, that's a problem I bet many people on this webinar experience, and people without MS, but especially hard when you have MS and you have to manage that in the context of fatigue, right? And some of the other challenges. So, I think my advice would be that that Jamal really look to setting realistic expectations for themselves. So, looking at not trying to do it all, maybe asking for some help, and setting maybe just one small goal that they do for themselves, that's just for themselves and not for their kids or their family. Oftentimes I think even just taking 5 minutes at the beginning of the day to set the intention of what they want the day to look like, or setting, doing a breathing exercise or doing something you enjoy, just to kind of build up your own reserve. But I think, recognizing that this is a time where the more you can lower your expectations of what you can do, and being okay with doing a good enough job versus a perfect job, that's going to help. And again, tapping into others who are also probably struggling, and looking for ways to support one another by sharing duties or what have you.
Helen shares that she's really busy and she wants to know what she can do each day to build her resilience skills that doesn't take a long time.
Yeah, that's a common theme I hear from people. So you're not alone in wanting that. I would say, again, maybe setting aside a time a day. I like to recommend morning, just because that's when most people are freshest. I know that's not always easy for everybody if they're not a morning person, or their morning, they have to hit the ground running. But, finding maybe just 10, 15 minutes or even 5 minutes. And I would recommend doing some kind of mindfulness meditation or relaxation, or conversely, if you have the time, maybe putting some kind of habit that helps you feel good, like an exercise habit, or 10 minutes of reading something just purely for pleasure, or whatever it is that just fills up your tank with positivity. I would find some time for that in your day, and make it a part of your day that's just as important as things like brushing your teeth or caring for your children or going to work. Put it on your schedule and honor that time, even if it's something small.
Regina says, I'm having a hard time with everything since I was diagnosed last year. Everyone in my family thinks I've had enough time to adjust and I need to just buck up. How do I help them understand it's not that easy?
Yeah, that's something I hear, unfortunately, a lot too. I think because the symptoms are not always so visible, and even when they are, I think families mean well, but I think in our society we have this idea that if people just bucked up, they'd be fine. And I think really giving yourself permission, Regina, to to be true to yourself and to know that this isn't something you just suddenly adjust to in a year. I mean, there's no time frame, and you will probably find that there are times you do well and there are times that are harder. And that's just part of living with MS, and to give yourself permission. And you know, it might be helpful for your family, for them to you know, learn, you know, read some of the materials about resilience and about MS. In our My MS toolkit, we have sections on our different tools for managing MS. We have some handouts just for family that talk about this very issue, about how family can be helpful, that they can be helpful by not expecting any certain course or path for you, but just allowing you to be where you are and being supportive. And the handouts have some ideas on how to be supportive in a way that's helpful.
Well, speaking of being helpful, while you and I have been talking, Julie has been in the background pulling questions together from our viewers. So Julie, you have a few questions for us?
Do I ever, Dr. Ehde? There's a lot of conversation happening in our question box and on our social media platforms. So I'm going to dive right in with Angela's question first. She's asking how to maintain or build resilience even during difficult times, like setbacks, like a relapse. What kind of advice do you have for Angela?
Yeah, that's a good thing. I would say one thing I would recommend is to have a plan for relapses. If you're someone who has relapses, or even just other kinds of setbacks, you have a stressful time coming up, or don't know when that's going to be, to put together a plan. And it might be something you even write on a card, or have in a note on your phone, but to kind of have a plan and build that plan on things that are reasonable to do it. So during a relapse, that's not the time to go run a marathon, right? I mean, so maybe it's something like having the name of 2 friends or 1 friend that you can contact and just have a fun social chit chat with. Maybe it's knowing that for some people, having a spiritual practice, and knowing that you're going to make sure you get that into your routine, or visit with your pastor, whatever it might be, but building that in. So, but having this plan of 2, 3, 4 things that you can do that help you build resilience. I think it's also really important to have that perspective taking, to kind of take a step back and say, okay, when I'm in a relapse, or when I am in a relapse, what can I do? Are there ways I could think or do differently that would help me get through this difficult time? So I think it's all about trying to plan for the unexpected, which is hard to do, and really being kind and self-compassionate to yourself, to really just be grateful for what you can do during that time, and to treat yourself with kindness, which is easier said than done. And some of the mindfulness or self-compassion practices that the resources will have can be helpful in learning that.
Well, you just mentioned being kind and having compassion with yourself. And we heard from Chrissy, who says she's had MS for 6 years and she still feels like she hasn't adjusted to having it. And she's asking, what can she do to feel more at peace with it?
Yeah, I certainly think one option would, if she hasn't tried it, would be to think about talking to a psychologist or counselor who has expertise in MS. The society can help, an MS navigator could help find somebody with that expertise, and to look at, not because what she's experiencing is wrong. It isn't. For some people, finding peace can be something that takes time, or some people tell me they never find peace, they just learn to work with it. But I think, maybe talking to a counselor, and the good news is that right now, most counselors, most psychologists are able to provide care via telemedicine or telehealth, via video calls, telephone. So, the pandemic shouldn't prohibit anyone from seeking that care out. Another thing would be to look at attending a support group for people with MS. Sometimes people are a little nervous about that because they worry that they're going to see things that make them feel worse instead of better. But most people, I find, once they actually go, they find it helpful to talk with other people who've been in her shoes. I think the other thing I would think would be just just maybe developing kind of a mindfulness practice, because that can be really helpful in helping people to be kind of aware of how they're responding and maybe not, accepting, or whatever word we want to use, and just find ways to kind of have a different perspective just by being aware of our current perspective.
Yeah. Well, that's great that you mentioned our wonderful team of MS navigators. At the end of our program, John will tell the listeners how to connect with a navigator, so that's great. We've heard from a lot of folks talking about things like anxiety and fear, and you talked about the connections between building resilience and mood changes that we can see in MS. Mary Margaret is saying she wants to know how to deal with the fear that comes along with a new MS diagnosis.
Yeah, I think the first thing is not to try to avoid the fear or suppress it, but to just acknowledge it is anxiety provoking. It's normal to feel anxiety and fear in the face of something new and unexpected, or something new that's threatening, right? MS threatens how we feel about ourselves, how we think about our world, our abilities, threatens our health. That's a really normal thing. I think, however, what's important about resilience is that while you recognize that, then really working to try to mitigate that threat by looking at trying to perceive it as a challenge, or thinking of it as a challenge. And that's, it's easy for me to say, it could be harder to do, but I know that if you can look for ways that you can even have small wins or small gains, little things you do that help you feel like you're able to manage that. And the other thing is, anxiety is something that responds really well to things like relaxation exercises. That anxiety responds well to talking to other people who are supportive. It responds well to, recognizing what's making you anxious, and then kind of working with that, there's a variety of ways that can be really helpful. So it's very normal, and there's things you can do to manage the anxiety.
A recurring theme I keep hearing you say are those small, easily achievable goals, and I think that's something for us all to keep in mind, and that will help us be a little more compassionate with ourselves if we don't achieve everything we want to achieve. I just heard from Annette not too long ago, and she says she's hearing you say the importance of social connections, and often when she's talking with her friends, they want to know how she's doing, and she says saying okay seems disingenuous, but if she shares more details, she finds herself getting upset and having her symptoms worsen as she talks about them. So what are some strategies that she can use without turning people off when she doesn't want to talk about her MS?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great thing to communicate to her friends and close friends that she trusts. So for example, maybe sometime when she's feeling good, and there's a variety of ways she could communicate this in person. She could talk to them, by phone or via email or text, but just saying, acknowledging that it's from a place of concern. Say, I love that you care, that you ask me about this. Sometimes I find I just don't want to talk about it. It's nothing about you. It's just about the fact that sometimes for me, it can make me upset to talk about it. And sometimes I want to, and sometimes I don't. And I love that you ask, but there are going to be times when because I don't want to, maybe, what do you think about if you don't ask me all the time, but I will bring it up when I do want to talk about it. Or if you ask me and I give you an answer, I'll let you know if I don't feel like going into any detail about it, but know that I know that it's because you care. So, validating that, it's coming from a good place nearly all the time, but that taking ownership of the fact you don't have to talk about it just because someone asks you. And it's okay to not talk about it if you don't feel like it, just as it's okay if it makes you upset. They're asking because they care. So.
That's great. In addition to all the questions that we're getting from people, we're hearing from a lot of our listeners who are sharing their ways that they do build their resilience. And it's really fun to hear some of these stories. So I chose one that, before I turn back over to John, I'm just going to read it. You can comment, or we can just all, find encouragement from it. This is coming from Betty. She says she was diagnosed in 1989, but had symptoms for many years before her diagnosis. And in her chosen career, which she loves, it's very demanding for her physically and mentally. And resilience is a necessity for her constantly. And despite her increased symptoms, she says her resilience level's at an 8 or 9 out of 10, simply because I want to continue my life as I wish it to be. And I just thought that was so positive and so encouraging, and it was just nice to hear and see people sharing those positive words with one another.
I'm so glad to hear that they're doing that, because some of the questions you've asked me, I wish I could turn to somebody with MS and say, well, how would you handle this? Because there's so much collective wisdom from people who are on the front lines of MS. And so I would encourage people to share with one another. And that's where I see the benefit to having connections through society events, including virtual events like this one, because it just gives people a chance to learn from one another. And really, everyone out there who has MS, they are the experts, really, on this topic. And there's much to be learned.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn things over to John to close this out.
Well, thank you, Julie. Thanks to all of you who submitted some great questions today. And thank you again, Dr. Ehde, for joining us today. I think that one of the best things that anyone can do for themselves, especially during these uncertain times, is to make sure that the information that you're getting is credible and reliable. So we'd like to share some resources with you. And these are the resources that you can count on. I want to remind you that if we were unable to get to your question today, the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner in answering your questions and connecting you to the very best information and resources. You can contact an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the MS Society's website, and you'll see all those particulars in a moment. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're in the midst of an emotionally difficult time for so many people. And I want to make sure that you're aware that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They offer free and confidential support for people in distress, as well as suicide prevention and crisis resources for you or your loved ones. You can reach them by calling 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. If you'd like to learn more about building your resilience, please be sure to visit the website, the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org, and search for Success Through Resilience to access some excellent resilience building programs that Dr. Ehde has already alluded to. These programs include inspirational videos, stories, a resilience quiz, and some really useful tools and additional resources. And for more information about Dr. Dawn Ehde's work, please visit www.uwmsrehabwell.org. Every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, I continue the conversation that we start here. So I hope you'll take a few minutes and give Real Talk MS a listen. You'll find the Real Talk MS podcast at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. With vital funding from supporters like you, the National MS Society will work to ensure that resources and programs like today's are available, and that the MS research community rebounds quickly from COVID-19, so the progress and momentum toward finding a cure continues. As you're able, please make a donation to the Society's COVID-19 Response Fund by texting the word GIVE to 68686, and you'll get a link right back to the MS Society's COVID-19 Response Fund webpage. I hope you'll consider contributing today. You can connect with the National MS Society on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And please make sure that you're on the Society's mailing list so you'll continue to receive the latest information on MS and updates on upcoming programs like this one. I'd like to thank Dr. Dawn Ehde for joining us today, and I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us. Please remember that a recording of this webinar is going to be available for your review on the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert. And now I have a quick favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webinar is important. So you'll see a survey pop up in a moment when we close out. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to that survey pinned to the comments section. And on YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continually improve, and it helps shape future webinars. Now, the survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Dr. Dawn Ehde and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.